Taniguchi Naya, a 24-year-old employee, worked at Aeon Mall, a massive suburban shopping center that sold everything from food and clothing to electronics and furniture. Something about the place felt off, though, and it all started when he received a transfer letter with an unreadable destination. That day, after wrapping up his shift, Taniguchi left the staff-only room and thanked his boss, though he was a little annoyed he was the last one heading home while everyone else had already left. As he walked, he debated where to eat since hunger was starting to hit, but his thoughts kept circling back to the strange transfer letter. Despite reaching out to the main office for clarification, he had yet to get a response. How was he supposed to prepare if he didn't even know where he was being sent? Just as he was lost in thought, a strange feeling washed over him. Turning around, he spotted a rabbit crossing his path. But this wasn't an ordinary rabbit. It was the size of a minivan. Before he could process what he was seeing, two massive birds soared past him. A forest, one that definitely hadn't been there before, loomed nearby. Panic set in. This was supposed to be Kasugano's Aeon Mall, so how had the surroundings changed so drastically? The mall itself was still standing, but everything else was different. The sky was darker, the Milky Way swirled above, and a horned rabbit the size of a car stood nearby. And then he noticed something else. Perched on the mall's rooftop was a dragon. Hoping this was some kind of bizarre dream, he pinched himself, but the pain confirmed it was real. That unreadable transfer letter? It wasn't a mistake. He had actually been transferred to an Isekai version of Aeon Mall. Memories of earlier that day came rushing back. Right before everything changed, he had stepped on an event gimmick in the employees-only area. The floor had trembled beneath him and glowing patterns appeared. In the chaos, he had rushed back to the staff-only room, only to find a girl standing there waiting for him. The girl congratulated him on successfully crossing over. Confused, but trying to keep his composure, Taniguchi thanked her before quickly realizing something was very wrong. Snapping out of it, he started bombarding her with questions. Who she was, what was going on, and whether this was actually an isekai. Unfazed, the girl calmly confirmed his suspicions. Introducing herself as Ayori from the HR department, she explained that she was there to brief him on his new assignment. At first, her name didn't ring a bell, but then it hit him. She was the one who had sent that mysterious transfer letter. The same one who had ignored all his attempts to get an explanation. Ayori sighed, saying that even if she had explained everything earlier, he wouldn't have believed her. She then thanked Taniguchi for showing up for the transfer and told him his new posting was right here, Aeon Mall Isekai. Taniguchi, still trying to process everything, quickly asked her to slow down. She was skipping too much information. What exactly was Aeon Mall Isekai? And why did an entirely different world have an Aeon Mall? Ayori, unfazed, nodded, saying she understood his confusion. She explained that 5 years ago, a certain location in Japan had mysteriously connected to another world. The transfer gate between them worked using Isekai technology, stabilizing the wavelength between the two worlds. When the wavelengths matched, even if only for a brief moment, people could travel back and forth through the gate. And the place that got connected? None other than Aeon Mall Kasugano. Once the senior management realized this, they launched a top-secret plan to open a branch in this other world. Taniguchi was speechless for a moment before blurting out, "Wait, so you're telling me the entire company's senior management has lost their minds?" Ignoring his outburst, Eri continued, explaining that there was a cycle for when the wavelengths matched for humans. Every 6 months, large shipments of goods and raw materials could be transported. Smaller batches, around 3 cage carts worth, could be exchanged every 2 to 4 weeks. As for sending and receiving data, that could be done roughly every 3 to 7 days. The idea was to gradually stockpile materials until Aeon Mall Isekai was fully operational. Still in disbelief, Taniguchi asked why he, of all people, had been chosen. There had to be better candidates in the company. He even pleaded with her not to tell him it was because he had no family. Ayori cleared her throat and fixed him with a knowing look. "You said you wanted to do business somewhere interesting." Taniguchi froze. His mind flashed back to a conversation he'd had with his boss. Back then, he had casually mentioned that instead of staying in Kasugano, he'd rather be posted somewhere remote, maybe even an island or, if possible, overseas. His boss had chuckled and asked, "What about another world?" At the time, Taniguchi had laughed it off, saying it sounded interesting. Having lost his parents young and later his grandparents, he had no real attachments. The challenge of bringing Aeon Mall's appeal to another world actually intrigued him. Now, remembering all of this, Taniguchi tensed. Yeah, he had said that during his job interview. Ayori smirked, complimenting his sharp memory. Exactly what you'd expect from an elite employee at the main office. She even pulled out a copy of his original application form. Under preferred locations, he had circled Japan, overseas, and, most damning of all, Isekai. Taniguchi's face turned red. That was a joke! I didn't think it actually meant another world. He groaned, realizing he had completely brought this upon himself. After a deep breath, he asked the most important question. Could he actually go back? The worlds connected every 6 months, right? Eri confirmed that he could return when the cycle allowed. If he wanted to resign, that was also possible, but even then he'd have to wait until the next window opened. Taniguchi's frustration simmered as he dragged his luggage through the eerily quiet mall. The thought of being unceremoniously thrown into this bizarre situation gnawed at him. He still couldn't wrap his head around the fact that a Japanese supermarket was running in another world, much less that he was now in charge of it.
The girl said, "You are now the manager of this branch. According to the policy, local hiring from this world is allowed. You also have to supervise everything and ensure that the sales goal is achieved." Taniguchi asked her. He only has 3 years of experience, and he's really becoming a manager. When he inquired about the sales goal, the girl informed him that it was 100 million yen in Japanese currency. Taniguchi was completely stunned, as if his soul had just floated away. Meanwhile, Iori carried on, casually mentioning that, by coincidence, this place followed a calendar almost identical to Japan's 12 months a year, 30 days each. Doing a quick calculation, Taniguchi realized he'd have to pull in about 3.4 million yen in sales every single day. That number hit him hard. He immediately blurted out, asking if only a single section of the supermarket was even up and running. The thought of reaching 100 million yen in sales every month felt ridiculous. To make things worse, stock shipments were limited to just 3 cage carts every few weeks. No matter how he tried to wrap his head around it, the math just wasn't adding up. But instead of answering, Iori stayed on track, telling him to use the provided laptop to place orders for anything he needed. Frustrated, Taniguchi snapped, accusing her of dodging his questions on purpose. Yet, she acted as if she didn't even hear him and continued relaying more details. She casually dropped the news that his personal belongings had already been delivered. On top of that, she pointed out that the empty tenant space nearby could be used as his living quarters if he wanted, but only as a rare exception. Still confused, Taniguchi pressed for answers about his stuff, but Iori brushed it aside, saying there wasn't enough time to go into details. If he wanted more info, he'd have to ask the previous manager when they showed up for work the next day. Then, without missing a beat, she mentioned that if monthly sales didn't hit the target, Aon Mall Isekai would be shut down. Even so, the most critical thing was keeping the transfer gate stable. As she was about to disappear, Taniguchi yelled, demanding to know what would happen if the gate wasn't secured. Without much emotion, Iori simply stated that the connection would weaken, making it harder to return. Before he could get another word in, she vanished. Oh, just like that, a guy with only 3 years of work experience was suddenly in charge of Aon Mall Isekai, starting tomorrow. Not long after, he noticed his stuff was actually there. For a brief moment, relief washed over him. At least he had his belongings. But soon, that relief turned into annoyance. The thought of someone randomly going through his things without permission irritated him to no end. As he paced around with his luggage, his frustration only grew.
He found himself wondering why Aeon was so unnecessarily large, with all the tenant spaces empty, giving him the freedom to pick any one of them. Despite that, Taniguchi remained engulfed in despair. It wasn't until later, when he checked, that he realized everything, his furniture, appliances, clothes, books, and personal belongings, had been delivered. The document accompanying the delivery explained that Aeon would take care of his home during his absence. His family, originally farmers, had a vast piece of unused land, which Aeon had agreed to look after, relieving Taniguchi of that burden. The promotion he had received had brought significant changes, a salary increase, and numerous benefits that had more than doubled his pay. Along with that came a ring, a translation ring, which, as per the office, would automatically translate any conversation as long as he wore it. He found himself puzzled by the technology behind it. Still unsure if the ring would work as he hadn't been able to test it, he selected a place to stay and, in doing so, realized he had no idea how the toilet worked. Upon checking, he found the flush was working fine, and even the wall socket had electricity. It was clear that he couldn't confirm everything just from observing the mall's interior, but for now, all he needed was sleep. After lying down on the bed, he looked at the shutter, wondering if closing it would be enough to keep out any potential threats. But as he thought of the dragon he had seen on the rooftop, he figured the shutter wouldn't do much against something like that. Exhausted, Taniguchi decided to put off worrying about it until tomorrow, his patience worn thin. He then realized he had forgotten about dinner and wondered what the food would be like in this strange new world. The next morning, Taniguchi woke to a breathtaking sunrise. The air felt incredibly fresh, and he wondered if it was the surroundings that gave it that quality. But deep inside, he couldn't shake the feeling of wanting it all to be a dream. Unfortunately, when he opened his eyes, nothing had changed. A large bird caught his attention, soaring through the sky. He could tell it was dangerous and definitely a carnivore. He thought it might even hunt humans. Taniguchi reflected on his situation. Despite not graduating from a top university, he had somehow ended up working for Aeon, a prestigious company. It all came down to his comment about how conducting business in another world would be an interesting challenge, and, more importantly, his lack of family, which seemed to have made him an easy target for a company like Aeon. He also recalled Iori's words about how, even if he quit, it would take half a year before he could return home. If that was the case, he might as well commit to the work and try to enjoy it. Trying to stay optimistic, he thought that this could be an isekai, and maybe there would be beautiful women or even elves to meet. Just as the thought crossed his mind, a girl appeared out of nowhere, shouting at him and demanding to know who he was. Before he could react, a sword was suddenly pointed at him, and he froze in tense fear. Taniguchi felt a wave of nervousness as he questioned if it was really a sword pointed at him. Out of nowhere, he found himself in an incredibly tight spot. But then, to his astonishment, he realized he could understand the girl's language. The girl asked what exactly he was. Taniguchi felt a small sense of relief as the translation ring seemed to be working, though he was surprised to find that he understood her language even without it. Still, he wasn't sure if they could hold a proper conversation. Frustration bubbled inside him as he longed to just go back home. The sword moved dangerously close to his neck, and in a panic, he blurted out that he was going to be the new manager at the Aeon Mall in this new world. The girl, clearly shocked, demanded to know if they had been waiting just for her to pass by, of all places, to humiliate her like that. Taniguchi was baffled by her words, and confused, he asked, "What?" He realized that if she decided to strike, he would be in serious trouble. To his surprise, the girl reacted even more strangely, shouting that if he had said he would attack, it meant he was planning to pounce on her. This, she declared, was the worst possible start to her morning. As she began swinging her sword around awkwardly, Taniguchi tensed up, now even more on edge. She apologized to her parents, claiming that her purity had been ruined right then and there. Terrified, Taniguchi nervously pleaded for her to wait, warning her that swinging the sword like that could be dangerous. But she didn't listen, continuing to move the sword in erratic motions. He wondered if the translation ring wasn't working properly. Just then, the girl stumbled and fell to the ground when one of her shoes broke. Embarrassed, she admitted that he was the first man who had dared to speak to her. She went on to say that, as an elf, they would never yield, no matter what happened to their bodies. Taniguchi, still in a state of confusion, tried again, introducing himself as Taniguchi, and telling her that he would proudly take the role of manager at the Aeon Mall's branch in this world. He asked if she could hear him, and, noticing she had mentioned clocking in, he wondered if she was implying that she was fine with him being an employee of Aeon. Curious about her name, Taniguchi asked her to tell him. The girl, now more composed, answered, introducing herself with an extremely long name. Chloe Dupois, Christophe, Claudine, Virtue, Ondine. Taniguchi, hearing her long name, found it a bit tedious and boring. Minutes later, as the situation calmed down, Taniguchi explained everything that had transpired. Chloe, finally realizing the misunderstanding, apologized. She seemed relieved that he wasn't some villain trying to drag her into the shadows for unspeakable deeds. Taniguchi, glad the confusion was cleared, asked if her name was really that long. Chloe explained that her full name signified her heritage. She was Chloe, part of the Dupois family in the village of Vertu, protected by the spirit Ondine, with parents named Christophe and Claudine. Taken aback by her explanation, Taniguchi tried to process everything. Chloe added that if he wasn't an elf, he could just call her Chloe, as she had heard that in some places people introduce themselves in a simpler way. As he stood there staring at Chloe, Taniguchi couldn't help but think about her words. She had mentioned being an elf and wearing metal armor. Everything about her seemed a bit different from what he had initially imagined. Chloe, noticing Taniguchi's gaze, snapped, demanding to know what he was staring at. Embarrassed, she nervously asked if he was imagining her in such an awkward position. Taniguchi, feeling the tension rise, suggested they just forget about it. But then he reconsidered, thinking it wasn't the worst thing after all. Chloe, finally piecing everything together, realized that the manager from Japan, who she had been waiting for, was actually him. She revealed that she had been managing the shop all this time, keeping her promise to hold the fort until Taniguchi arrived. Chloe explained that she was counting on him now, as the long-awaited trading by a Japanese person was about to begin. Taniguchi, still trying to grasp everything, asked if it would be all right for him to observe on his first day to get a sense of how things worked at the Aeon Mall in the other world. Chloe, clearly excited, urged him to relax, promising that she would handle everything. After all, she was a holy knight. Taniguchi felt a twinge of anxiety as he wondered if things would really work out with this clumsy former manager. He also thought the whole holy knight thing seemed a bit much, especially for an elf female knight. The scene shifted to later in the evening, where Taniguchi felt utterly defeated and tense. The day had been a complete letdown, and he realized it undermined the entire purpose of being at the Aeon Mall. He recalled how Iori had mentioned that the operational supermarket section only included fresh produce. The main attraction at the Aeon Mall was the delightful fresh vegetables brought in by the local farmer's wife on her cart. Taniguchi was tense because, well, that was all there was, and it was roped off so they couldn't even access it. To make matters worse, there were spots showcasing Japanese products, which only added to his frustration. Taniguchi decided to try one of the vegetables, and after tasting it, he remarked that freshly picked veggies straight from the farm were fantastic. The sweetness of the veggies caught him by surprise, and he thought eating them chilled might be a good idea. He was also surprised to see so many customers, like adventurers and merchants with their carts. The road in front of the Aeon Mall had more traffic than he expected. However, despite the crowd, many of the customers seemed to be there only to grab a few veggies and take a break at the sparkling fountain or use the clean restroom nearby. At that point, Taniguchi started to feel like it might be better to close the shop since there was nothing in the mall that actually encouraged people to buy. Just then, Chloe came over and called his name. Taniguchi asked what was going on, and Chloe, looking puzzled, replied that he was the manager and it was time for the sales report. Taniguchi tensed up, clearly not wanting to hear it. Chloe explained that while customers usually came in after noon, they even had some visitors in the evening. She went on to share the sales for the day, which, when converted to Japanese yen, amounted to 1,600 yen. Taniguchi was stunned. Chloe proudly continued, saying that they had 42 customers that day. She even asked, in a slightly boastful tone, if it wasn't impressive that she could do the maths. Taniguchi, however, sank into despair when he realized the target was 100 million yen per month. This meant they needed around 3.4 million yen each day, and he was the one responsible for meeting that target. Seeing Taniguchi's distress, Chloe asked what was wrong. Then she suddenly realized she might have made a mistake with the decimal point and offered to explain it to him. Taniguchi, frustrated, exploded, shouting that the target was far too high. He pointed out that both the number of customers and the average purchase per customer were dismal, leaving them a long way from meeting their goals. Taniguchi, frustrated by the terrible sales, couldn't shake the bad feeling creeping over him. He suddenly shouted, demanding to know what was really going on. He thought about Iori and wondered what exactly he was supposed to do in this situation. Calling out Chloe's name, he caught her off guard. Chloe, flustered, asked if he was suggesting they actually do the work. Taniguchi, exhausted, replied that they should skip it for now. He declared there would be no more lounging around or just observing. Starting tomorrow, he would take charge as the store manager. He then added with a determined tone that he was counting on her. Chloe, brightening up, expressed how excited she was and couldn't wait to work with him. The next morning, Taniguchi woke up with a clear goal in mind. He needed to figure out exactly what to sell. After the mall closed the previous day, Taniguchi had done some research and discovered the major hurdle. He couldn't easily source supplies from Japan. While there was a decent stock of non-perishable food, replenishing it seemed risky. He needed to investigate what kinds of clothing and furniture were in demand in this otherworldly realm. He decided to visit the town to check out the local lifestyle and see what goods were being sold. Just then, Chloe arrived. Taniguchi greeted her with a good morning and asked why she was up so early, reminding her that he would be taking over as the manager from that day. Chloe excitedly replied that she was buzzing with energy, feeling more alive than she had since running away from the village. Taniguchi, teasingly, asked if she was acting like a kid before a field trip, but his attention shifted when she mentioned running away from home. Chloe, still excited, asked if there was anything she could help with. Taniguchi, seeing an opportunity, said it was perfect timing for her to pitch in. He asked if she could dig around a bit because he wanted to plant some seeds. Chloe, looking surprised, asked, "What? Are we talking about planting seeds?" Taniguchi, confused by her reaction, responded with a simple yes. He jokingly asked if her mind was still stuck in the world of a middle school boy. Meanwhile, Taniguchi found the specific seeds he wanted to grow. Chloe then asked if he wanted to create a field, to which Taniguchi corrected her, saying it wasn't a farm, just a lawn. He wanted to see if Japanese plants could take root. Chloe explained that the soil here was bare, and the dust was unbearable, so planting grass would be ideal as a training ground. It was wide and flat. Taniguchi, amused, replied that soldiers didn't get trained in fields. He teased Chloe, wondering if, as an elf, she wasn't more excited about greenery. He handed her a shovel and told her she could use it to dig. When Chloe took the shovel, she was stunned by how incredibly light it was for her. Taniguchi, alarmed, quickly asked her not to swing it around. He then instructed her to just turn over a bit of soil and plant some grass seeds. Noting that he wasn't sure they'd grow, so just a small amount would do. Chloe happily accepted, assuring Taniguchi that with the shovel she could dig to her heart's content. As she started digging, she gleefully praised the shovel's quality and how smooth the wheelbarrow was. Taniguchi, stunned by her speed, anxiously asked her to stop, saying they didn't need such a large area dug. Chloe paused, still enthusiastic, and remarked on how fantastic the shovel was and how light the wheelbarrow felt. She curiously asked what the wheelbarrow wheels were made of, and noted that if they had something like this for carts, it would sell like hotcakes. Taniguchi, realizing the absence of rubber products in this new world, pondered the implications. Chloe eagerly asked if all she had to do was plant the seeds, and Taniguchi confirmed with a simple yes. She then eagerly got to work, planting the seeds with excitement. Taniguchi, however, was amazed by how quickly the field transformed. He hadn't intended to make such a sprawling lawn. It looked fun, but the image of an elf covered in dirt made him pause. Suddenly, Chloe interrupted his thoughts, asking if they could sell the shovel and wheelbarrow. She was sure they would be a hit. Taniguchi, tense, responded that he was sure the new world had shovels and wheelbarrows too. Chloe, undeterred, agreed, but explained that while she had seen similar items, she had never encountered one as light and sturdy as their shovel, nor a wheelbarrow that moved so smoothly and straight. Taniguchi thought about it and concluded that it likely came down to the different levels of technology. The metal quality in the shovel had to be different, and the wheelbarrow's precision was something new. He decided it was worth trying, telling Chloe that they might not have much gardening gear in stock, but if she thought it was a good idea, they could sell some. He apologized for the shortage and explained that for now, it would be one item per person. Chloe cheerfully agreed and immediately started spreading the word about the shovel and wheelbarrow. Chloe first approached an ant, explaining how light the shovel was and how the wheelbarrow moved straight. The ant was amazed at the wheelbarrow's performance. Then Chloe called over some adventurers to check out the pickaxe and recommended the shovel to a merchant with a wagon. The adventurer was delighted by the lightness of the shovel, commenting on how easily it could be taken into a dungeon. The merchant was also impressed, realizing the shovel would make loading wagons much easier on bumpy roads. Chloe excitedly told Taniguchi that the adventurer was buying the shovel too. Taniguchi, while responding with a simple okay, couldn't help but be amazed at the energy of the people in this new world. One adventurer even commented that the shovel was such a steal at that price, asking Taniguchi if he was even making a profit, since he seemed just as excited as the customers. Taniguchi chuckled, but deep down he wondered if he'd messed up the yen conversion, realizing he had set the prices too low by Japanese standards. Afterward, Taniguchi sold the shovels and wheelbarrows one by one, all while pondering the lack of mass production techniques in the new world. For now, he decided to put that thought on hold. In the evening, Chloe laughed, asking, "Isn't business such a delight?" Taniguchi, exhausted but satisfied, was glad everything had sold out. Chloe, still full of energy, excitedly remarked that the Aeon Mall, run by the Japanese, was truly remarkable. Taniguchi couldn't help but notice how happy Chloe was. He shared that it wasn't just about chatting with customers and selling a few items. It was about providing them exactly what they wanted. What seemed ordinary to him could be an exciting first-time experience for someone like Chloe. He also speculated that Chloe had been thrust into the role of manager unexpectedly and had been struggling to find her footing. Chloe, in turn, started thinking about what they would sell the next day. Taniguchi mentioned that it wasn't fair, especially since none of the local hires knew much about Aeon. He warned her that delegating everything didn't mean things would run smoothly. The day had been intense. They had a total of 32 customers, generating 8,100 yen in sales. Later that night, as Taniguchi soaked in the bath, he couldn't shake the feeling of dissatisfaction. The sales hadn't even come close to the daily target, leaving him with a sense of unease. Taniguchi's mind raced as he realized that, even with great products, foot traffic was essential. Without it, he needed to come up with a strategy to attract more customers. Suddenly, a sneeze caught him off guard. He was bathing outside in the cold, and the chill made him realize he really needed to rethink his bathing situation. His thoughts shifted to the camping gear section, where he wondered if there was anything useful. He could boil water with the mysterious magic stone stove in the food court, but he quickly dismissed the idea of filling the commercial kitchen sink with hot water. It seemed like a recipe for disaster. Taniguchi shuddered at the thought of catching a cold. If that happened, it would be a disaster, so he decided it was best to head to the bathroom and get to bed quickly. As he walked, he noticed that the mall was eerily quiet. There was no one around, and he couldn't help but think about the lack of a security guard. In a world filled with monsters, it seemed strange that merchants hired bodyguards to travel, but there was no visible security in the mall. Taniguchi hadn't seen the dragon since the first day, but it wasn't just monsters that worried him. Thieves and other dangers posed a threat too. He decided he would ask Chloe about it the next morning. Feeling uneasy, Taniguchi tried to reassure himself. He had locked up everything tightly and there was no way for monsters or thieves to enter the Grand Aeon Mall, but the unease lingered. Suddenly, he heard a voice from behind, saying, "There's no way." Taniguchi froze, turning slightly to see something that resembled a black ghost. His heart raced in fear, and he shouted in panic. He bolted, wondering what that was. It wasn't a person, it looked like a dark stain, and Taniguchi questioned if it was just his imagination, a chill running down his spine. He quickly assessed his surroundings. If he went forward and turned right, he would reach his room. In a panic, he decided to make a run for it, but as soon as he moved forward, he tripped and fell to the ground. When he opened his eyes, he was stunned to see a skeleton's head right in front of him. His body went cold, and for a moment it felt like he had passed out. Taniguchi thought to himself that he couldn't handle this anymore, not in such a chaotic, cabaret-like way. Taniguchi's heart raced as he shouted in fear, only to hear a strange sound in the distance. In his panic, he fainted, but when he opened his eyes, he realized it was just his alarm ringing. He let out a relieved breath, realizing it had been a bizarre dream. Ghosts and skeletons haunting the night at Aeon Mall. Chuckling to himself, he reflected that staying up too late wasn't good for his sanity. He promised himself he'd stop doing that. Just as he thought about getting his day started, he glanced out the window. His eyes widened in shock as he saw a skeleton walking like a living person. He froze for a moment, trying to calm himself. This was a whole new world, he reminded himself. There were monsters, elves, and all sorts of magical creatures roaming freely. It wasn't so strange if skeletons and ghosts existed. If they were real, then he didn't need to fear them. But as he looked closer, he noticed the skeleton was holding a polisher. A wave of tension washed over him. Were the skeletons really cleaning the floor? To his surprise, the skeleton nodded, as if acknowledging his thoughts. Taniguchi managed a nervous smile and praised it for its work. The skeleton, however, looked tense, its bones rattling slightly as if it had heard the scream from earlier. Taniguchi was taken aback. The skeleton could talk? The translation ring was working perfectly, and he marveled at how amazing it was. He confirmed if the skeleton had heard the scream, and it responded in the affirmative. Everything's fine, Taniguchi reassured, grateful that the skeleton seemed concerned for him. The skeleton's posture relaxed, its skeletal face smiling as it showed its appreciation. After a moment of silence, it went back to its cleaning. Taniguchi let out a sigh of relief, wondering if it was real that skeletons worked as janitors. He was still processing the idea that this was part of Aoon's management system. He was also a bit furious with Iori for not mentioning this in the documents. How had he not known about the skeletons and ghosts? Later, to his surprise, Chloe casually asked Taniguchi what he didn't know about it. She explained that the skeletons handled the cleaning and security duties while the ghosts kept watch at night. Taniguchi was taken aback. This was normal? Wait, Taniguchi said, clearly agitated. Are there any other employees besides the skeletons and ghosts? As manager, I should know about these things. Chloe looked at him, puzzled, and shrugged. Oh, I forgot to introduce you to everyone. She then whistled, calling for the others to gather. Taniguchi, still confused, braced himself for whatever was coming. To his utter shock, a large army of skeletons marched toward him, and his jaw dropped. That's way too much, he exclaimed, his mind reeling. Chloe apologized, explaining that the ghosts couldn't come out during the day because of the sunlight. Taniguchi's eyes widened further. Wait, they were ghosts too? He was genuinely scared now. Aeon is too wild for making skeletons work, even after death. Just then, he heard a voice say, "We're here because we were asked to help out." Taniguchi turned, eyes wide in disbelief. What? Did the skeleton just talk to me? To his further surprise, a girl stepped out from behind the skeleton. She smiled and corrected him. Not quite. I'm not a skeleton. She knelt down in front of Taniguchi, greeting him with a formal bow. My name is Anna Maria, but you can call me Anna. Blushing at the unexpected introduction, Taniguchi quickly introduced himself and apologized for the delayed greeting. Anna had been unaware that Taniguchi was the new manager, having been stuck in the basement for quite some time. She shared her surprise, not realizing who he was. Taniguchi, on the other hand, felt a wave of relief upon seeing another human, remarking how amazing it was to finally meet someone, as he thought he was the only human at Aeon aside from Chloe, surrounded by skeletons and ghosts. Noticing Anna's confused expression and odd behavior, Taniguchi asked if something was wrong. He soon wondered if Anna had arrived with a group of skeletons, making him question whether she might also be one. Anna, however, clarified that she was once human. Taniguchi was shocked and, although scared, smiled at the revelation, finding it unbelievable that a human could no longer be human. Deep down, he wished he hadn't heard it, but he held back his true feelings. Anna then mentioned that they were dealing with a powerful undead known as a lich for the time being, and that the ghosts and other smaller creatures were his subordinates. Taniguchi, though outwardly smiling, felt an overwhelming sense of fear inside, realizing that just when he thought he'd found someone normal, things became more complicated. As they continued, Anna explained that these undead never tired or needed sleep, and that the paycheck was solely for her. Taniguchi, though still a bit shaken, responded that Aeon must be thrilled to have such talent working around the clock for a single salary. It seemed like the perfect deal, like an endless happy meal. Anna's laugh eased the tension, and Taniguchi, feeling flustered, noted how she had a more grounded reaction than Chloe, even though she was undead. He began to think that if they could overlook the undead part, it was nothing but benefits. The job required a large team, but Anna could manage everything with just her salary, which seemed like a win for him. He was eager to work with her. Anna cheerfully agreed, and Taniguchi hesitantly asked if she could keep the ghosts and skeletons away from him at night, insisting that it wasn't because he was scared. Anna laughed again, promising to make sure everyone knew. Just then, Chloe interrupted, asking if Taniguchi had finished his greetings, as she wanted him to meet someone else. Anna, confused, wondered if the young child had introduced themselves yet. Taniguchi, equally confused, looked around. Chloe whistled, then looked upwards. Taniguchi followed her gaze and saw a girl on the rooftop. His previous encounter with a dragon made him uneasy, so he hadn't dared approach it yet, questioning whether employees were allowed in such a dangerous place. Before he could think more, the girl jumped from the rooftop, leaving Taniguchi stunned and terrified. Anna casually referred to her as a little rascal. Taniguchi watched in shock as the girl landed safely on the ground. Anna remarked that jumping was unnecessary, despite the hassle of stairs. Taniguchi, overwhelmed, thought to himself that on just his third day as manager he had witnessed an employee risk their life. The girl introduced herself as Barbara, and Taniguchi, now even more tense, realized she couldn't be more than 10 years old. He shouted out, concerned that the labor standards were being violated. Chloe, confused, wondered aloud why Taniguchi kept mentioning labor standards. Barbara, cutting in, clarified that she wasn't a child, to which Chloe added that despite Barbara's appearance, she was actually older than she looked. Taniguchi, trying to make sense of it, asked if Chloe was 20. Chloe quickly responded, demanding he excuse her, and explained she had been recruited into the Knight's Order straight after graduating from the academy, making her only 18. She also proudly added that both her heart and body were pure, then asked if anyone would dare question that. Frustrated, Taniguchi acknowledged that she was 18, but now the question shifted to Barbara's age. Barbara answered that she was 140 years old, making it clear that she wasn't a child. Taniguchi was stunned by the revelation, and Chloe confirmed it. Taniguchi tried to process this, mentally noting that Barbara, though looking like a child, was actually older than his grandfather. A bit of an awkward thought crossed his mind, but he quickly dismissed it, relieved that he hadn't fallen into any labor law issues. Then Taniguchi turned to Anna, curious about her age. Anna replied she was 2 years old, prompting Taniguchi to ask if that was her age at the time of her death. Anna explained that as a lich, she was 21 when she became undead, but since the undead don't age, she was still 2 years old. Taniguchi nervously nodded, realizing that asking a woman her age, especially in another world, was always a delicate matter. And Taniguchi, at least he thought Anna should submit a resume, since she was technically an employee. The employees at Aoon, he observed, were elves dressed in metallic armor, even during their shifts, while the lich stayed mostly hidden in the basement. Skeletons and ghosts managed security and cleaning duties under the lich's command. Meanwhile, Barbara, despite looking like a 10-year-old, was actually 140 years old. Taniguchi, noticing horns on Barbara's head, asked what race she was. Barbara proudly answered she was a dragon, and Taniguchi, stunned, repeated the word, struggling to process it. Barbara reassured him that she could transform into a dragon, though Taniguchi, still skeptical, wondered how she could do that with her small size. Barbara, getting frustrated, insisted she could, and Anna chimed in, encouraging Taniguchi to let Barbara demonstrate. Anna called for the skeleton team captain, who approached Taniguchi only to run past him and head straight to Barbara. Taniguchi, puzzled, wondered what was going on. Chloe, noticing his confusion, asked Barbara to raise her hand, and just as she did, Anna shouted at Barbara to remember to wear underwear. Taniguchi, shocked, asked if Barbara was really stripping. Chloe quickly scolded Taniguchi, asking if he had a thing for little girls. Taniguchi, tense, told Chloe to stop thinking like that. After a brief pause, Chloe seemed to think it was fine and asked Barbara if she was ready. Barbara confirmed with a simple yes. Barbara then shot into the air like a rocket. Taniguchi, in shock, yelled that it was going to be a disaster, but as she soared, she transformed into a full dragon. Taniguchi was completely stunned, while Chloe praised Barbara, saying it was just as cool as she had imagined. It suddenly clicked for Taniguchi. Barbara was the dragon he had spotted on the rooftop that day. So, the dragon was an employee after all. Frustrated, he shouted Iori's name, demanding to know where she was and what was going on with the staffing plan. Barbara let out a mighty roar in front of Taniguchi and he froze, stunned. He couldn't help but wonder if this was the same dragon he'd seen on the rooftop that first day. Anna, noticing his confusion, explained that Barbara was a red dragon, and despite being 140 years old, she was still considered a baby in the dragon world. She also added that dragons were a mystical mix of reality and illusion, capable of transforming without being bound by the law of conservation of mass. Taniguchi, in disbelief, immediately asked Anna, "What about the law of conservation of mass?" Barbara, hearing this, looked at Anna with confusion as well. Chloe, chiming in, pointed out that Barbara's dragon form was actually the reason the Aoin Mall was practically monster-free. Barbara sometimes showed off her dragon form to mark the territory as Dragonland, keeping everyone in line while her skeleton army dealt with any monsters that dared to come close. Taniguchi, processing everything, realized that the Aoin Mall was effectively protected by dragons and skeletons, which explained why, aside from a rabbit sighting, he hadn't encountered any monsters during his time there. Taniguchi then asked if the skeletons roaming the dragon's territory affected foot traffic, and a heavy silence followed. Chloe finally replied, reassuring him that humans were supposed to be oblivious to the monsters, so it wouldn't have an impact. She then glanced at Anna nervously and asked, "It's really fine, right?" Anna, however, quickly redirected the situation by asking Barbara to transform back into her human form and get to work. Taniguchi, realizing he'd been skillfully sidestepped, shook his head in amazement. A few minutes later, a woman arrived at the Aoin Mall and greeted Chloe warmly. Chloe greeted her back with a friendly "Auntie." The woman explained that she had brought her husband along to check out the cat stroller that the mall had for sale the previous day. The husband, smiling, asked if there were still any strollers available. Chloe assured them there were, explaining she'd already checked the warehouse and set aside the stock. Taniguchi, noticing the interaction, commented that it seemed like they had a new recruit and decided to take a tour of the Aeon Mall. As he did, Chloe called for Barbara, and when she arrived, she asked if Chloe needed help. Chloe asked Barbara to assist the auntie with unloading her goods, as they needed to move them to the vegetable stand. Barbara, with a simple, "Okay, she got it," read. Chloe then asked the uncle to follow her and check the hand truck. Meanwhile, Taniguchi, noticing the cart was taller than Barbara, shouted out, asking if she needed help. Barbara, unbothered, assured him she was fine and effortlessly lifted the entire cart. Taniguchi, astonished, realized that even in her human form, Barbara still retained her dragon's strength. Auntie, laughing, commented that Barbara was incredibly strong and playfully said she would love to have her as her son's bride. Taniguchi, taken aback by how quickly Auntie accepted the idea, couldn't help but think she was being a little too quick to jump to conclusions. Barbara, on the other hand, blushed at the suggestion and followed Auntie, who began walking toward the vegetable stand. Inside the mall, Taniguchi overheard a conversation between some adventurers. One adventurer, Raka, was raving about the mall's bathroom, saying that once they experienced it, they wouldn't want to go anywhere else. His friend Mac agreed, calling it far superior to any city inn. Raka added that the water in the flesher was perfectly designed to wash everything all the way to the bottom. Taniguchi smiled, understanding their enthusiasm, as the Aeon Mall's restroom was indeed top-notch. However, he noticed something odd. Many of the customers were covered in mud, and some mysterious liquid seemed to be dripping from their bags. As Raka reached the reception desk, he looked surprised to see a different vendor girl there, instead of the usual one. Anna explained that the usual staff member was outside conducting a live demo, so she was just filling in for a bit. Raka, noticing the opportunity, asked Anna if they'd like to grab a drink after his shift. Mac laughed, teasing Raka about falling for someone, but Raka calmly denied it, insisting he was just asking as a casual gesture. Anna, smiling, thanked him for the offer but explained she had other tasks lined up after this. Raka, unfazed, shrugged and casually asked for 5 snacks. Anna agreed and suggested they check out the live demo if they had time afterward. As Taniguchi observed from a distance, he felt a growing tension and thought that if the adventurers became too clingy with Anna, he might need to make a quick exit. But as the situation remained friendly, he relaxed, though something started to nag at him. He wondered if the adventurers were in a worse spot than he was. He muttered to himself, half joking, that if he kept pressing, he might end up on Anna's bad side and get devoured. To his surprise, Anna's voice suddenly replied, saying she wouldn't eat him, so he didn't need to worry. She added in a playful tone that as a lich, her diet was like a human's, but she could survive without eating. She joked, "Isn't it odd that I'm dead, yet I'm still going on living?" Taniguchi blinked, realizing it was a genuine undead joke. Anna then explained that the shop was empty because she had asked some of those little ones to handle things and warned Taniguchi not to get startled. Before he could react, a ghost appeared beside him, causing him to jump in surprise. As he regained his composure, he noticed the skeletons busy cleaning up the mess left by the adventurers earlier. Taniguchi soon realized that the ghosts kept an eye on the customers, while the skeletons handled the cleanup. The Aeon Mall had a seamless operation. Ghosts and skeletons worked together behind the scenes, ensuring everything stayed spotless without customers ever noticing. He was impressed by their efficiency, thinking they could outshine even the best employees back in Japan. Taniguchi couldn't help but shout, "So, that's why the Aoin is always so clean." Anna nodded, explaining that since the customers were taking a break, she would go check on the safety and maintenance of the power and water supplies. Taniguchi, intrigued, asked if he could take a look, as he was completely clueless about how it all worked. Anna smiled and said, yes, absolutely, no problem. She then turned to Barbara, asking if she had finished arranging the vegetables. Barbara confirmed she had, and Anna immediately gave her another task. She asked Barbara to call Chloe inside to handle the checkout if any customers showed up. Barbara agreed, and Anna turned back to Taniguchi, asking if they should head out. But then she paused, remembering something important. I need to take a light, she said. Taniguchi, confused, asked why she needed a light. Anna explained that they didn't need lights in the underground facility because it wasn't necessary for them, but for Taniguchi it was pitch dark and quite dangerous. Feeling uneasy, Taniguchi asked if he could grab a torch from the room. The scene shifted to later, where Taniguchi was still searching for the torch. He finally found one and turned it on, apologizing for the mess in the room. Is this much light enough? He asked. As he glanced at Anna, he noticed she was staring at something, a wide grin spreading across her face. Taniguchi, still puzzled, asked Anna if it was really her. Anna responded casually, saying, yes, it's me, it's totally fine. Taniguchi, still trying to understand, wondered what exactly Anna was staring at so intently. Taniguchi then smiled and jokingly offered to lend her whatever she was eyeing, suggesting she could swing by outside of business hours. Anna, a bit surprised, asked if it was really okay. Taniguchi assured her it was, and she thanked him for the help. As he watched her, Taniguchi realized this was the first time he'd ever brought a woman into his space, and it felt more like a tenant area. Anna, though a woman, wasn't human. She was undead, but still had human traits. This thought made Taniguchi a bit nervous, and he felt it was best to hurry up. He quickly asked if they could head out, to which Anna agreed, saying they should check out the boiler room first. When they entered, Taniguchi was taken aback by what he saw. Did you make this? He asked in amazement. Anna laughed and replied, no, I can't do anything like that. I handle inspections, management, and some simple repairs, but that's it. Taniguchi, still impressed, mentioned that he had thought he could figure it out just by looking at it, but quickly realized he was wrong. Then he noticed a powder in Anna's hand and asked what it was. Anna explained that it was powdered scales from Barbara's dragon form. Taniguchi, a bit tense, asked what exactly that meant. Anna clarified that the scales fell off during Barbara's regeneration, and they used the powdered scales as fuel for power generation. Since the scales were packed with magical energy, just 1 or 2 pieces a month were more than enough. Taniguchi, feeling relieved, thought it was incredible that they could power everything with their own fuel, significantly reducing running costs. He also realized that the employees at the Aeon in the parallel world were top-notch, and he hoped they were getting well paid for their hard work. Anna then reminded him to hurry up as their next stop was the water supply facility. Taniguchi, still processing what he had just learned, thought back to Anna's mention of Barbara's scales also being used in the water supply. He found it a bit confusing that while power generation consumed the scales, the water supply seemed to rely solely on magical energy. He admitted to Anna that it was honestly a bit confusing, but realized that both she and Barbara were extraordinary in their own right. After some time, Anna finally announced that the inspection of the underground facility was complete. They then moved on to the forest, which made Taniguchi a little nervous. He hesitantly asked Anna if they had wandered off the known path and what lay within the forest. Just then, to his shock, some skeletons appeared. Taniguchi was stunned, thinking it was the same skeleton squad from earlier. They had a knack for showing up out of nowhere and scaring him half to death. Anna explained that the skeletons kept watch from a distance during the day to avoid drawing attention. She then touched one of their skulls and said it seemed like there were no unusual activities in the area. Taniguchi was impressed by how Anna could gather information with just a simple touch, finding it incredibly convenient. At that moment, a skeleton approached them, carrying a bowl full of mushrooms and offering it to Anna. Anna thanked the skeleton for its help, but Taniguchi, still panicked, nervously asked what it was and whether she planned to eat it. Anna calmly assured him that the mushroom wasn't for eating, it was strictly for research purposes. Confused and still on edge, Taniguchi nervously asked if it could be something creepy or if it was just his bad vibes kicking in. Anna didn't immediately answer, but after a pause, she laughed and said it was a secret. Taniguchi, curious, was about to ask more questions when Anna, sensing his unease, smiled and reassured him there was nothing sinister going on. She told him that this was pretty much the core of her work, so if he had any questions, she was ready to answer. Taniguchi, still overwhelmed, simply muttered a no, as he was too lost to form any questions. He apologized again for being the manager and not knowing much, admitting that so far all he had grasped was a mere glimpse of this new world and his amazing team. Beyond that, he was still in the dark. Anna, sensing his frustration, told Taniguchi they could take their time, adding that it was probably time to head back to the store. Taniguchi, recalling the hectic morning, remarked that everything had turned into a blur. As they headed back, Taniguchi thanked the captain and the skeletons for their hard work. All the skeletons smiled in response, while Anna thanked him for his support. Later in the food court kitchen, Taniguchi found himself thinking about Anna's advice to take things slow. However, in his mind, the shop needed to boost sales quickly or they'd be in trouble. While preparing food for himself, Taniguchi mentioned that he was making potato stew with solid consomme, using some vegetables that were about to be discarded. He added some bacon and consomme that hadn't hit the shelves yet and gave it a try. He reflected that, despite all the mounting problems, he still couldn't live without eating. He was glad to have picked up some cooking skills at his grandpa and grandma's place. Just then, Chloe, Barbara, and Anna arrived. Chloe asked Taniguchi what he was cooking, as it smelled amazing. Barbara chimed in, saying she was starving. Taniguchi, feeling a bit tense, responded that even though they were low on guests, it wasn't right for everyone to just show up like that. Anna reassured him, saying not to worry, if they had any visitors, the little ghosts would let them know. Just then, a ghost appeared from the ceiling, making Taniguchi realize how convenient it was, but also how it could give someone a heart attack. Chloe, completely distracted by the smell, interrupted, asking about the delicious aroma. Taniguchi explained it was just his cooking, noticing everyone drooling at the sight of the food. With no way out, Taniguchi invited everyone to try the extra food he had made, and they all dug in together. Chloe, taking a bite, raved that the food was fantastic, and asked Taniguchi how it could taste so amazing with hardly any meat. Taniguchi, a bit confused, asked if she wasn't an elf and whether she didn't like vegetables. Anna, enjoying the soup, agreed that it was delicious, mentioning the golden broth with a rich flavor that really brought out the sweetness of the vegetables. It made her feel alive again. Taniguchi, feeling awkward, quickly asked Anna if that was another undead joke. She wasn't really coming back to life, was she? He felt he needed to clarify that. Barbara then asked for a refill. Taniguchi apologized, saying there was no more left. Barbara responded with a sulky okay, her expression showing clear disappointment. Taniguchi, trying to cheer her up, promised he'd make it again for her next time. Taniguchi noticed Chloe's surprised expression and casually remarked that her appetite seemed quite strong. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if he would demand something absurd in exchange for cooking again, but he dismissed her concerns, saying she was overthinking it. He also mentioned that the dish wasn't particularly complicated. Anna, still skeptical, commented that a soup with such rich flavors must have taken a long time to prepare. Instead of responding directly, Taniguchi shifted the conversation by asking what they usually ate. Chloe admitted that she mostly consumed meat and hadn't had vegetables in ages. Taniguchi was taken aback, realizing he had never encountered an elf with such eating habits. Anna brought up the dangers of foraging, noting that wild mushrooms and herbs could sometimes be poisonous, but reassured him that it wouldn't be lethal. Her casual attitude made Taniguchi question her sense of caution. Barbara, on the other hand, mentioned that she often ate raw rabbit or similar prey. This response at least made sense to him given her dragon nature. After hearing their answers, Taniguchi felt unsatisfied, realizing their diets were far from balanced. He decided that a trip into town was necessary to understand the local cuisine better. Observing their enjoyment of his simple pot-au-feu, he began to suspect that their food choices had been questionable for quite some time. He figured he should contribute something meaningful to their meals. Meanwhile, the group continued their lively conversation while eating. Ideas about potential food trends crossed his mind. Perhaps curry-roo, instant meals, and ready-made dishes could become popular. However, with only a limited stock arriving every 2 weeks, the supply chain seemed unreliable. His thoughts then drifted toward the roles each of them played. Anna was highly skilled, leading a dedicated team responsible for cleaning, security, and even the upkeep of electrical and plumbing systems at Aeon Mall. Barbara, in her towering dragon form, served as the mall's protector, her very presence ensuring the smooth operation of essential infrastructure. As for Chloe, he had initially dismissed her as clumsy, but the townspeople adored her. Surprisingly, she was also a sharp entrepreneur who put immense effort into her work. Though their customer base was small and quite different from the norm, he had to admit that the staff at the mall were exceptionally capable. He realized he needed to match their dedication. Later, while talking to Chloe, he unexpectedly asked if she was familiar with POS data. She admitted she wasn't, much to his surprise. Trying to clarify, he asked if she was only using the register for checkout purposes. Chloe confirmed this, marveling at how efficiently it calculated prices. Curious, she asked if it had any other function. Taniguchi, feeling a bit tense, assumed she had understood its purpose, considering she properly used barcodes. He then asked about their customer count and sales records. With confidence, Chloe stated that she had already recorded all the data manually and kept everything neatly documented on paper. Taniguchi, upon realizing this, couldn't help but exclaim in disbelief. The fact that Chloe had been manually calculating everything stunned him. He went on to clarify that the Aeon register contained an extensive amount of data, tracking sales, customer visits, and various statistics. Accessing the POS data was as simple as pressing a button, but since the register's interface was entirely in Japanese, it was no surprise that Chloe hadn't been able to use it. As he processed this information, his expression became unreadable, prompting Chloe to hesitantly ask if she had made a critical mistake. Dismissing the idea, Taniguchi assured her that the issue lay entirely with Aoin. Despite not even knowing about POS data, she had managed to keep meticulous records of sales and customer activity purely by hand, a feat that left him genuinely impressed. Hearing this, Chloe flushed slightly, her reaction betraying her surprise. With an apologetic tone, Taniguchi admitted that he had assumed she was a bit scatterbrained, yet she had managed everything flawlessly, without realizing the scale of her accomplishment. He even took a moment to express his gratitude for her dedication. Chloe, however, seemed hesitant to accept the praise. She mentioned that someone had once labeled her a failure of an elf and an incompetent knight, making it difficult for her to believe in compliments. Shifting the conversation, she remarked that if someone ever wanted to manipulate Taniguchi, they would likely try to shower him with flattery. However, she personally saw no reason to do so, because, in her eyes, he was genuinely remarkable. Taniguchi hadn't expected such words from her, leaving him momentarily speechless. As if realizing she had said too much, Chloe suddenly announced, rather awkwardly, that it was almost closing time, and hurried off toward the entrance. Left alone with his thoughts, Taniguchi turned his attention back to the education plan, deciding that Iori might have some insights. At the same time, he considered the importance of ensuring that everyone at Aoin focused on their designated roles. By the end of the day, Aeon Mall had recorded sales of 9,300 yen, with a total of 53 customers, bringing the monthly earnings up to 1,900 yen. The following morning, Taniguchi couldn't shake off his unease about his outfit. Hesitantly, he turned to Chloe, asking if she was absolutely sure he didn't look strange. Brushing off his concerns, Chloe reassured him that there was nothing to worry about and suggested he just throw on the cape. That, however, was precisely what made him uncomfortable. He could only hope everything would be fine, considering that the cape had been retrieved from the underground by Anna. Her words echoed in his mind. How she had insisted it suited him perfectly, with nothing odd about it at all. No one would ever suspect he wasn't from this world. Even so, the thought of standing out on the streets lingered in his mind. With a sigh, he noted that it had already been 4 days since he became the manager of Aeon Mall's otherworldly branch. For the first time, he was stepping into the city to scout the area. Given the quiet morning hours, he felt it was safe enough to leave the shop under Anna's supervision. He then turned to Chloe, asking whether the town was a 30-minute carriage ride away, or if it would take about an hour on foot. Chloe considered it for a moment before suggesting that if they walked at a relaxed pace, that estimate sounded about right. Unless, of course, they ran. Startled by the idea, Taniguchi immediately shot down the suggestion, clarifying that he only wanted to gauge the distance. But something else suddenly struck him. Was she seriously thinking about running in full metal armor? To his disbelief, Chloe confirmed it enthusiastically, reminding him that she was in training. That response left him puzzled, leading him to question whether elves in this world were naturally more muscular. Recalling Anna's words, he remembered her mentioning that elves here were a bit unusual. And even the term familiar elf had its own unique meaning. Before he could dwell on it further, Chloe abruptly warned him to step back. Confused, he demanded to know why. "A monster," she answered. His reaction was immediate, shock evident in his voice as he blurted out his disbelief. Chloe, however, remained calm, noting that it appeared to be a small one. Just then, a horned rabbit came charging straight at him. But before it could get any closer, Chloe was already in motion. Her sword flashed, and in an instant, the creature was decapitated. Taniguchi stood frozen for a moment, struggling to process what had just happened. It was only after taking a closer look that he exhaled in relief. After all, it was just a rabbit. Though, upon further inspection, he noticed the distinct horn protruding from its head. Curious, he asked if this was a smaller version of the horned rabbit he had spotted near the mall the previous night. Chloe, after confirming he was unharmed, brought up something the farmer lady had mentioned. Apparently, a unicorn rabbit had been sighted in the area. Still shaken, Taniguchi thanked her, though in his flustered state, the words came out jumbled. Chloe, now equally confused, questioned what he had just said. Embarrassed, he quickly clarified that he had been referring to her sword. Something about it suddenly struck him as odd. Tension creeping into his voice, he hesitantly asked if it was just his imagination or if her sword was actually made of wood. Looking back, he realized he had been too startled before to notice. Without hesitation, Chloe explained that the weapon was the spirit sword Ep du Poids, a treasured heirloom passed down through her family for generations. Hearing the name, Taniguchi couldn't help but stumble over the pronunciation. However, that wasn't what bothered him most. Raising his voice, he pointed out that the real question was how she had managed such a clean cut using a wooden blade. With a knowing smile, Chloe revealed that Ep du Poids was no ordinary sword. It had been forged from ancient wood and blessed by the spirit Ondine of the village of Vertu. It possessed a unique ability, the power to cut whatever one willed, whenever one willed. Taniguchi acknowledged that the sword wasn't just an ordinary wooden one, but something far more special. Chloe, visibly pleased, mentioned that she was used to being ridiculed by knights, yet here he was, actually grasping the significance of her words. Recalling their earlier conversation, Taniguchi pointed out that she had referred to herself as a knight, though she was now employed at A1 Mall. He wondered aloud if she had once belonged to the Knight Order. Chloe, with a cheerful expression, clarified that she was still serving as a holy knight and had been assigned to the mall by the kingdom's order. This revelation caught Taniguchi off guard, as it was completely unexpected. Chloe urged him to listen closely, explaining that Aowan had first sought official approval to establish and run the mall. Astonished, Taniguchi could only mutter in amazement. She continued, mentioning that although some resistance had come from the Merchant Guild, the necessary permission had ultimately been granted. Since Aowan was a business from an unknown world, the government had decided to deploy the Knight Order to observe and provide counsel. Processing this, Taniguchi casually remarked that he might as well consider himself the overseer. Chloe went on, stating that upon closer inspection, the store's activities posed no real threat, leading to a change in the advisory role. As Aowan Mall required skilled employees, she had stepped in as both manager and advisor. Though Taniguchi maintained a composed expression, his mind was racing. Initially, someone else had been assigned, but eventually, Chloe, whom he found completely unreliable, had taken over. This shift gave him the impression that the government had lost interest, treating the situation as unimportant. Chloe reassured him that she was trying her best to fulfill her responsibilities as a manager, but she lacked a clear understanding of what a real Japanese Aoyan Mall should be like. For that reason, she had requested someone truly familiar with it to be sent over. At that moment, Taniguchi pieced everything together. It was because of Chloe's request that he had ended up in this world. However, pinning all the blame on her felt unfair. Setting up and operating a business entirely with local recruits seemed like an absurd move, and something finally clicked in Taniguchi's mind. He asked Chloe to confirm whether she was not just an employee, but also a knight acting under government orders. She nodded, explaining that knights were only ever dispatched for state-level matters, and their presence ensured both oversight and protection. Taniguchi, now drenched in nervous sweat, realized the situation was far more complicated than he had assumed. He hesitantly inquired if the mall's existence was in jeopardy. Chloe admitted that the problem was severe. The royal court's magicians had been involved in the construction, meaning the government might seize the entire building. More concerning, however, was the Merchant Guild, which had been a constant threat. From the beginning, they had been seeking ways to take over Aeon, either through acquisition or, in the worst-case scenario, a forceful raid. The more Taniguchi listened, the more alarmed he became. None of this had been mentioned to him before. He recalled Iori saying that if Aowan Mall failed to generate 100 million yen in monthly sales, it would be forced to shut down. Observing his pale face, Chloe asked if he was feeling unwell and offered to lighten his burden. Tense, Taniguchi pressed her for a deadline. Chloe revealed that the government expected them to reach the target within 5 months. Still trying to reassure him, she noted that there was enough time to turn things around. Taniguchi was so overwhelmed by the 5-month deadline that he nearly passed out, collapsing to the ground. Chloe rushed to his side and tried to help him recover. As Taniguchi lay there, panic started to set in. His mind raced with troubling thoughts. He realized that the next opportunity for him to return home would be at least 6 months away when the gate reopened, meaning he wouldn't meet the government's deadline. This realization weighed heavily on him. Taniguchi wondered what would happen if they couldn't reach the 100 million yen sales goal within the 5 months. He feared the government might seize Aowan Mall before the gates reopened, or worse, the merchant guilds might take control. He also wondered if he would never be able to go back home. He tried to encourage himself, telling himself that since returning home wasn't an option, the only choice was to hit the sales target. Despite this, the harsh tactics of Aeon made him feel a sense of sadness. Chloe, noticing his distress, urged him to pull himself together, reminding him that the city was nearby. A few moments later, when they arrived in the city, Chloe cheerfully mentioned that it was the closest town to Aowan and also her hometown. She offered to show Taniguchi around if he wished. Taniguchi casually acknowledged Chloe's commute from this town, but Chloe became flustered, thinking about something else. She explained that she couldn't show him her room because it was a girls' dorm. Muttering to herself, Chloe wondered if Taniguchi was seriously thinking about storming the girls' dorm. Frustrated, Taniguchi denied having any interest in doing so. Chloe then remarked that Taniguchi seemed to be feeling better. Taniguchi responded that there was no point in dwelling on it at that moment. Although Taniguchi's mind was still occupied with the looming sales target, he decided to focus on improving Aeon's sales for the time being, convinced that achieving that goal would solve everything. As they walked through the town, Taniguchi noticed it was cleaner and more developed than he had expected. Chloe pointed out some people with animal ears on top of their heads, explaining they were beast folk. Taniguchi asked if the dog folk carrying luggage were part of that group, and he noticed a couple of catfolk nearby. Chloe proudly shared that her town was a place of peaceful coexistence, encouraging Taniguchi to observe the various tribes and races living together. She also mentioned that not all places were as harmonious, and shared an incident from her travels where she had almost gotten into trouble. Chloe angrily referred to how despicable humans could be. Taniguchi asked where they were heading next, and Chloe explained that their first stop would be the butcher's to prepare the unicorn rabbit they had caught. Taniguchi was surprised to learn that she had brought the rabbit with her, but quickly realized it would be wasteful to just kill it. They arrived at the butcher's shop where a girl named Kavi greeted them. Chloe explained that she had gone hunting for the unicorn rabbit while on her way to work. Kavi, in shock, exclaimed that Chloe was still just a kid. Kavi then commented that the rabbit must have some special quality given how tender and flavorful its meat was. She asked Chloe if she was selling it. Toru, overhearing this, wondered in confusion if that had been a compliment. Chloe responded, asking Kavi to cut enough for her to eat for the day and then sell the rest. Kavi thanked Chloe, then curiously inquired about Taniguchi, noting he seemed like a stranger to her. Taniguchi introduced himself as the manager of the Aeon Mall's otherworldly shop, where Chloe had been assigned. Kavi nodded, understanding, before playfully asking if Chloe was really such a good person. Her question was more teasing than serious, as if speculating on a romantic connection. Chloe grew embarrassed, quickly denying it, saying Taniguchi was simply her boss. Kavi smiled, suggesting they celebrate, claiming rabbit meat brought vitality. She offered to add a little extra, declaring the night would be full of fun. Taniguchi, meanwhile, noticed Kavi wasn't paying attention at all. Suddenly, Chloe started thinking oddly, noting that despite calling Taniguchi her boss, he was getting too worked up. Taniguchi, now confused, wondered aloud if Chloe had always been this way in the city. After all, being labeled a clumsy knight couldn't just be about that wooden sword. Without delay, Taniguchi and Chloe awkwardly made their way out of the shop, but Kavi shouted for them to return soon. Taniguchi thought she must have misunderstood. He then asked Chloe where the meat was sold, noticing it wasn't visible anywhere. Even the meat from the unicorn rabbit she had sold had mysteriously disappeared. Chloe explained that the shop used storage magic tools. Taniguchi, intrigued, asked what kind of tools those were. Chloe pointed out that despite being a butcher shop, there was barely any smell, all thanks to the magic tools. Taniguchi marveled at how what seemed like an ordinary shop was much more fantastical than he had initially expected. He thought about how the new world lacked modern conveniences, but magic tools, powered by mana, seemed to fill in those gaps. He noted how impressive the gardening supplies and cooking utensils were. Realizing that he might have underestimated this new world, Taniguchi was surprised when Chloe mentioned taking him to the market next. At the market, Taniguchi observed many things and was astounded by the variety of items. He asked Chloe if people really sold such an assortment. Chloe replied, saying it was remarkable, and the market was open every day except during the winter. Taniguchi, still puzzled, observed that it didn't seem like people were using any preservation magic tools. Chloe explained that these tools were expensive, so not every shop could afford them. Taniguchi analyzed the goods further, noting that the vegetables were familiar, but the market had fruits not found in Aoin. Chloe shared that the area around the town didn't yield much fruit, so whatever was sold in the market had to be brought from distant towns. She also mentioned that transporting goods took forever with horse-drawn carts, and if magical tools were too costly, hygiene management must be a significant challenge. As Taniguchi, who had been eating fruit, suddenly paused, his expression shifted. He nervously asked Chloe if the vegetables from Aoion were safe to eat. Chloe reassured Taniguchi that the vegetables in Aoin were top-notch because she made sure they were properly cared for. Taniguchi, puzzled, asked, "What do you mean?" Chloe explained that every elf, herself included, possessed magical abilities, and as a holy knight, using magic came naturally to her. She elaborated that with purification magic, any bugs on the vegetables were swiftly removed. Taniguchi, relieved to hear this, realized that magic wasn't limited to just tools, it was real power. Still, he couldn't help but wonder about the whole only bugs die idea. What about bacteria and fermented foods? The technological development here seemed behind Japan's, but the magic was astonishing. A few minutes later, they were at a dining spot having lunch. Taniguchi wasn't impressed with the food. It wasn't terrible, but it certainly wasn't great either. He reflected that no wonder his pot au fait was so highly praised. Chloe offered him a piece of meat, claiming it had a great texture and was substantial. When Taniguchi tried it, he commented that it was incredibly tough. He asked in frustration how she managed to chew it given how tough it was. Chloe casually explained that it was simply the work of an elf. Taniguchi stiffened, unsure what to make of that. He thought to himself that elves could be pretty intimidating. Chloe then mentioned that both the eatery and the busy market were run by the Merchants Guild. Although there were many artisans' guilds, they were mere shadows compared to the Merchants Guild, which dominated everything. Chloe angrily ranted about how the merchants claimed that anyone wanting to do business had to pay for the space, squeezing money out of the less fortunate. Taniguchi, confused, asked if that wasn't a reasonable rule, depending on the circumstances. He tried eating the meat again, but could barely chew it. Taniguchi mentioned that even Aoin Mall charged rent from the shops within its guild. Chloe, shocked, asked if Taniguchi was suggesting he was just as sleazy as those guys. She then sarcastically asked if she couldn't pay for the venue, would she have to pay with her body? She expressed disbelief that a merchant guild member would even suggest such a thing. Taniguchi, tense, wondered if this was really happening. Chloe explained that she had knocked out the guy and the guards, turning them over to the authorities. It was after that incident that she was scouted by the Night Order. Taniguchi thought it was quite a shady story, but wasn't it Chloe who had broken the rules in the first place? Chloe angrily explained that ever since that event, whenever the man saw her, it was as if he had a script. Ah, here's the disqualified elf who can't follow the rules. What kind of trouble will she cause next? Taniguchi, still puzzled, asked if the Merchant Guild's interest in Aoan Mall was really due to that incident. Chloe, too furious to notice, finished her food. After a moment of contemplation, she muttered that she was so mad she could really use a snack. Taniguchi, amused, pointed out that she had just finished eating moments ago. Instead of replying, Chloe asked if Taniguchi had room for dessert. He agreed, as long as it was something light. Chloe eagerly mentioned a place she had in mind and insisted they go. A few minutes later, they arrived at their destination. Chloe, unsure of the exact location, said it should be close by. Suddenly, a girl's voice called out from behind, greeting Chloe as Sir Knight, and mentioning that it had been a long time since they last saw each other.